This is an oral history recording with Richard Shaw Graham. My name is Sally Landis Bohan, and I'm a family friend of the Grahams. Our families actually span 3 generations. Today is August the 16th, 2018, and we're reviewing this recording at the Henry A. DeLand House at West Volusia Historical Society. With that little bit of a background, Richard, this is your story, so I'm asking you now, tell us about your life here in DeLand. What brought your family here, and what was it like when you were growing up?
Well, I think the family came here because probably your father or grandfather recruited them from law school, my father. And it was a very prestigious firm, and he took that opportunity to settle here, and that's when they started having children and everything. I was born in the hospital right across the street from where I lived the whole time I was growing up.
Memorial Hospital.
Yeah, and it was,
Stone Street.
That's right. And I lived on Wisconsin, but it was
exactly.
Just walk over there. And I grew up in DeLand. I went to Dempsey Brewster Elementary School, which was on Wisconsin Avenue also, and we just walked to school. And through elementary school, and then I went to DeLand Junior High School for the 7th grade. After that, I went off to school in Rome, Georgia, a prep school called Darlington, and spent my 8th through 12th grades there, and then went to Florida State University and majored in business, and I intended to go to law school, which I did. When I graduated from there, I went to Stetson Law School.
And was Stetson Law School in DeLand, or had it moved to the West Coast?
It was in St. Petersburg.
St. Petersburg.
Right. I met the girl who I eventually married at FSU, and when I was in law school, she was home at her home in Jacksonville, and she taught school there, and I was in law school in St. Pete, and we would meet on the weekends and things.
And her name?
It was Virginia Bunnell Worsham, and that was her maiden name, and that's where everybody got to calling her Bunny.
Bunny.
Yeah.
Okay.
And you'll notice in that book that's what she's referred to as, Bunny.
Very good.
Anyway, we didn't marry until after I graduated from law school and passed the bar. Then we settled back in DeLand because I was going to work for the firm.
Well, let's back up just a little bit. You have brother and sister, right?
Right.
So how many children were there in the Graham family?
Okay, it's a brother and 2 sisters.
2 sisters.
Right. My brother, Johnny, was the oldest child. Then my sister Sarah came next. I was the 3rd child, and then 10 years after I was born, and when I'm sure they did not think they were going to have any more children, my little sister was born.
And what was her name?
Her name was Mary Shaw.
Mary Shaw.
Yes.
Okay.
And she lives in Athens now. Is a very successful artist and composer, and she got a PhD, and she's written a book.
And she lives in Athens, Georgia.
She does.
All right. So you and Bunny are here in DeLand, but you didn't just come directly to DeLand after law school. Didn't you have other interests elsewhere?
Yeah. I went through law school in 2.5 years. I went summer too.
You were very smart.
Well, I was just busy. Didn't have to be smart. But so I did that. So I graduated in January.
Of what year?
67.
1967.
Right. And the bar exam was probably March or April, but most of the law graduates would graduate in June or in the summer. So there weren't many in the class available for employment, for temporary employment, but the Attorney General's office of Florida, they needed some young attorneys that didn't have to be members of the bar yet to work with the legislature, called the Legislative Reference Bureau, and they hired me to do that. And my job was had to live in Tallahassee during the session, 1967 session, and I would go over to the House and Senate when the bills were filed, and I would read the bills and summarize them and testify before the various legislative committees as to what was in the bill. And I remember the only bill they told me not to even fool with was the bill that authorized the Disney World, because that was it was so big and thick, and it gave away so much that they didn't want it talked about too much at the time. I mean, it was a great thing for Florida, but they gave them taxing rights and everything else. But it was a really good experience because I learned about the legislature, and I learned how the laws were passed, and during the time. Bunny, but we weren't married yet. We were going to marry in June when the session was over, and I'd be in the bar and all that. But she had a good friend who lived in Tallahassee from college, and she invited her to come stay at her house during the legislative session, and she got a job for her with the governor. It was Claude Kirk at the time,
Claude Kirk was the governor.
Right.
All right.
Very colorful governor.
Yes.
And so
was he Republican or Democrat?
He was Republican.
He was was he our first Republican?
I think he was. I think first or second. Yeah.
Okay, very early.
Right.
In the rise of the Republican Party in Florida.
For sure. Yeah. So we did that. She did her job, I did mine, and I stayed with my grandmother who lived in Quincy.
Yes.
And had a great time, seeing her and the family over there, because my mother came from a fairly large family, and a lot of them were still in Quincy. They were tobacco farmers and car dealers and things like that.
Richard, let's talk just a little bit about what the land was like when you were growing up. We know you said that you grew up on West Wisconsin Avenue,
Right.
and that you went to Dempsey Brewster Elementary School. What was your childhood like? What were some of the things that you did? How was the land different?
Oh, well, it was segregated then, and that's the difference. But we did simple things like after school, a bunch of kids would get together and play baseball or football or at someone's house. Just a normal growing up, I guess.
There was no air conditioning, so we were always outside, right?
Pretty much, yeah.
And we had no televisions or...
No. I remember they were just coming in, and you get a little staticky one channel maybe. But I remember I took a trip with my parents, the family, and my father had to get dry ice to put in the window that blows in the cooler air into the car.
Oh, because the cars were not air conditioned then.
No.
Did you ever travel abroad when you were a child?
I did. I was. Let's see I was a child. When we went to Europe, my father worked with your father, and my father had, everybody had something happen that took them out of the firm, whether vacations or an illness or something, except my father, so he had to be there all the time covering everybody's cases. And that was for about a year or so without any time off. And so they said, take a good trip, and so he did, and we all went over. We had our own car put on the ship.
You took your car?
Took the car over there and toured Europe in our own car. And it was a wonderful time. My little sister, Mary Shaw, was a toddler. I mean, she was about 18 months old. And so, but we took her too. Yeah. But they weren't going to leave her. I can tell
Where
you
did
that.
you go? Do you remember it?
We went, all over, England, France, Germany for sure. We had.
And what year was this?
Oh, I'd have to guess. I think it was probably when I was 12 or 13,
Okay.
maybe. Yeah, that would make sense because Mary Shaw was like 2.
Okay. Okay. Yes, Europe Germany was still divided.
Right.
At that period.
Right.
Did you go into Germany?
We did. We went. You probably know the people, the Retts.
Oh yes.
Okay.
That's,
they were stationed in Germany. Jack Rett.
Jack Rett was Libby West's brother.
Right. Right. And so we went by to see them, and they toured us around and everything. Mm-hmm. They were at the military base.
Yeah.
So that was the main, and we took a couple of trips out west too. That's when we'd use the dries.
Okay. Well, tell me about your family. Your mother, Olive.
Right.
Wonderful artist, as I recall.
She started late, and but she did a lot of portraits for about everybody in town. And
an Olive Graham portrait is something to behold. Fine work.
Something I was really proud of her for is when she got out of school, she went up to New York, and I don't know if she had a job or what, but she started flying airplanes. This is way long ago, and she actually flew gliders.
You're talking about your mother.
My mother. Yeah.
I told you what my father said about your mother. He just adored your mother. But he said he always referred to Olive Graham as the iron fist in the velvet glove. He said if Olive Graham sets her hat for something, she's going to do it.
Yeah, it was all over then.
Yeah, that's right. Just get out of her way.
Right. And then my own family, of course, I've told you about Bunny. We've been married 51 years, and had a great run. And we have 2 children, 2 boys.
Okay.
And the first one is Richard Jr., but everybody calls him Duke. It was just a nickname, but it stuck. Yeah.
How cute.
And he was born in 71. In 1972, our second son was born, and his name is Armstrong. That's a family name from Bunny's side.
That's a good Southern name,
Yeah.
General Armstrong.
Yeah. So, and there, Duke he's a fluids engineer. He went to school at University of California, San Diego, and he started his own business, fairly recently, and is doing really well. And what he does is he's an engineer that does green construction, sustainability of buildings. He shows contractors and architects how to make the building more economically free from excessive utility bills and stuff.
And he's in California.
He's in L.A. Yes.
He's in a good place for that.
Yeah, because that's required
very far
there.
Ahead.
Right.
That's right. They're ahead of many of the other states in
Right.
terms of green services.
Now, the other son, Armstrong, is a lawyer, and he went to the University of Colorado, and he stayed there. So we're trying to get him back, but
It's hard
only
to
have
get
one
a person
grand
out of Colorado.
or California.
Better that you go visit them. Colorado's
and
a little cooler.
We do. And one grandchild, and that's
grandchild.
Duke, and his wife. He married a girl who also, her parents live in Ormond Beach also, and they're friends of ours.
Lovely.
So all four grandparents live here, and so they come here a lot, and we go out there a lot. But he's going to be 6 in February. He started the public school 2 days ago, out there in a new school, and he loves it already.
And of course, he's the world's greatest grandchild, right?
Oh yeah, and smartest, and yeah, I'd heard that so many times before I had one, and I said, that maybe that's true.
That's wonderful.
So we just enjoy being with him, and as much as we can.
Tell me a little bit more about your wife, because I don't think.
Okay, she's quite an artist too, and she doesn't paint as much anymore, but she's very creative. I mean, she does. For our church, she does all the flower arrangements and things like that. Anything that's artistic. She doesn't like to handle money, but she does everything else.
Okay. That's okay.
I mean, she's not a spendthrift, but she just doesn't like to be bothered with it.
That was sort of like my relationship between Daddy made the money and Mother spent it, because she always thought if there was checks in the checkbook, there was money in the bank. He never could get that concept out of her.
Yeah, that's.
And you and Bunny got married?
We got married in June 3rd, 1967. We've been married 51 years now.
Oh, congratulations. You've had your golden wedding anniversary.
Right.
Where did you go to from Tallahassee after marriage?
Well, then we did come to DeLand.
Okay, and you joined the firm?
I did, as an associate, and
at that time, the firm was known as Hull, Landis, Graham, and French. Your father was already a member of the firm.
Correct.
And was law partner with my father.
Right.
And Mr. Compton French was over in Daytona.
Right.
And Mr. Hull, and I think Mr. Hull and Mr. Landis had both died by then.
Well, your father actually was there for a while when I was there.
Okay.
A very short period, because
Yes.
I think he died in 1967, didn't he?
He did.
Mm-hmm. But I started, I may have started. No, I guess it was pretty much
Very
June.
close.
But I also knew your father when I was in law school, because he would sometimes get me to go get documents from some law firm and file them with the courts.
Well, I know the families have been very close now for 3 generations,
right.
Because your father, I believe, clerked for my grandfather when my grandfather was Attorney General, and
right.
That's how he got the connection to the law firm.
That's it.
So there was grandfather, and then your father, and my father, now you, and so that's 3 generations.
Right.
In that firm.
That's right.
Very good. All right, you're in DeLand. What was DeLand like during this period?
Okay,
In 1967, what did you find when you came here to live?
Didn't it look as good as it does now? I mean, that's been a fantastic redevelopment or preservation of old buildings, and it's just very impressive to me now to see it. It was always a great little town, and it had Stetson, which was a big plus.
1967 was a period of unrest in the United States, though, because integration was just on the verge of exploding. Was that becoming a part of your life in the law firm? The integration.
The integration was not ever much of an issue with the firm or with me. We knew what the Supreme Court had said, and that was it, and that was fine with us.
Brown versus the Board of Education had already been settled.
Right, right. Now, not all the southern towns or counties accepted it, and there was a real problem with time lags in implementing the Brown versus Board of Education mandate that the schools be integrated. So there was some resistance, but it wasn't in DeLand, I don't think, or Volusia County.
So from the law firm, what happened next?
Okay, the other thing that was why those were challenging times is the Vietnam War.
Oh, that's correct.
And that was raging. And so everybody was, when you got out, I got a deferment from the draft to finish law school, but it had run out then, so I had to join a service. And I looked at the JAG thing with in the Army JAG enrollment.
Now, what does that stand? What are those
Judge
initials?
Advocate General.
Judge Advocate General.
Right. Okay. That's the law version.
The law version.
And so I looked at that, but they required a 10-year enrollment, and it just wasn't. I wanted to get busy practicing law the way I was going to do it for my future, not. I didn't want to invest 5 years at that time. So I joined the Army Reserve, but I was waiting for my orders to go into active duty, and it didn't come for over a year. And so during that time, since we couldn't settle down very well because any minute I could get called in. But so we stayed with my parents for a good bit of the time, and then we finally after about 6 months, we got an apartment somewhere. But then I was called, and I did the 6 months active duty, and of course I had to leave the firm then. And then when I came back, I had a 6-year obligation to go to weekend drills and stuff.
For the reserve.
For the reserve, for the 6-year period.
Exactly.
Yeah, I did that in Jacksonville. I was in a Jacksonville unit when I started, but then I found a JAG unit and reserve unit in Orlando, and they let me transfer over to that JAG unit, and I got promoted from a private first class to captain just by changing units.
Well, congratulations.
Yeah. And we did, we go over on the weekends, and we would do legal work for the military base in Orlando. We do wills for people and things like that.
So this was when Lyndon Baines Johnson was president.
Right.
And how did that affect your life? The war, of course, but he started legal services, didn't he?
He did. That was his Great Society. I think that's what they called it. I know it was an initiative of his, I think. And he created the Office of Economic Opportunity, and that was what started the legal services. They started one in Daytona, small office. Warren Cobb, your good friend you grew up with, was the first executive director, and he hired me. I was anxious to get some trial experience, and so I went over there and worked with that office, and for a little over a year. After Warren left to go to work for another law firm, and so the board made me the executive director, and I've been practicing about 6 months, and so.
And it was when you were in this office then that came to your doorstep one of the most significant cases of your career, if I'm correct.
Correct.
Because there was a book written, and it was by Gilbert King, called Beneath a Ruthless Sun, that deals with the case of a retarded young man named Jesse Daniels,
right,
who was incarcerated up in Chattahoochee for many years, and that was your case. And it also involved another DeLand attorney, Ted Husfeld, but you were the lead attorney. And can you tell us the story of this case?
It's a long story, but I'll give you the quick version.
Very good.
It's a case where a very prominent lady in Oklahoma, Florida, which is in Lake County, was raped, and she was raped. And she was raped by she said, a husky black man. And the infamous sheriff over there, Willis McCall, went out and rounded up about 30 black young husky men and brought them in, interrogated them, and I think beat confessions out of a few of them. And then all of a sudden, the husband of the victim didn't want the stigma of her having been raped by a black person. And so he worked with the sheriff, the state attorney, and others to have this white, innocent,
who was retarded.
Right.
Yes.
He still slept with a teddy bear. Yeah. And they had him arrested. They took the case to a grand jury without his involvement, without his parents' involvement, without a lawyer's involvement, and got an indictment just based on what they said. And he did have a court-appointed attorney, but the attorney was the former state attorney, just retired, and he wrote letters to the court and said he's obviously guilty.
His own attorney wrote
letters
saying that he was guilty.
Right, and he wrote letters to Chattahoochee, where they sent him to Chattahoochee without any kind of a hearing.
Now, Chattahoochee, for people who may not know, is our state asylum for
insane people.
All right. And it has been at that time had been described as a hellhole.
I think that was my description in the book, because I went up there a few times, and it was a lockdown situation. There's no freedom.
And there was a criminal wing of this where he was. And
that's where he was, because he had the charge.
Exactly. So
and he was sent without any kind of a trial or hearing.
And there was also a woman from the Daytona Beach News Journal that worked prominently in bringing this case to the public's attention.
And she worked for the Lake County newspaper that she owned for many years, and that's where she really did the major part of the trying to resolve the case.
And they literally ran her out of business.
They ran her out of business in a fairly violent way, burning crosses in her yard, dynamite to her house.
We forget how vicious the Klan was in those days. So go ahead. We want to finish this story about what happened to Jesse Daniels. Okay.
He was there 12 years before I became involved.
Really?
Right. Yeah. I became involved when Mabel moved to Daytona Beach and was hired by the News Journal, the Daytona Beach News Journal. And she kept writing about Willis McCall and this case while she was here. In fact, Jesse's mother, Pearl, his father had died while he was there. His mother, Pearl, moved over to Daytona because I think Mabel got her a job at the Princess Icena, which is an old hotel in Daytona, as a maid. And so she lived in Daytona at the time. Mabel asked her to come down to see me when the office opened and when, that experimental legal service thing was just getting started. And so she did. She came in and I interviewed her, and, it's hard to believe that something that bad happened. And, so I wanted to check it out first. And So I called the attorney they had in Lake County. Finally, Mabel got him an attorney, but he couldn't get anywhere because the Lake County people, the sheriff and the state attorney, were telling people don't use him as an attorney, or bad things will happen. So he had to quit. But I called him up and I said, among other things, I said, do you think he's guilty? He said, I know he's not guilty. They railroaded him. And then I talked to Mabel. I'd never met her. She sent her to me just because I was head of the office. But I got to know her very well. And she gave me extensive background on the case. And so we went ahead and took the case.
She was relentless, it sounded like, in the book,
was.
and that had followed this young man for many years and was determined to do something about it. So when you decided to come back to the law firm here in DeLand, but you wanted to bring this case with you because
Correct.
That law firm doesn't generally handle criminal cases, do they?
No.
But you were determined to bring this case with you, which...
Well, I had a couple other offers too, and so I had a little bit of bargaining.
Okay.
But I said, I'll come back, and I don't want a salary. I want just to be paid in accordance with what I do, and I have to bring this case back because no one at Legal Services was going to finish it.
Okay.
And Ted Husfeld got very interested in the case, and he talked everybody into going along with that. And I told him it's going to cost some money because obviously he has no money, his mother has no money, and I estimated it would be about $10,000 in fees to conduct a hearing to get him a trial.
Which was a nice piece of change back then.
Back then it was. I guess it still is, but it really was then.
Right.
And they went. They asked me, do I think he's innocent? I said, yes, he is innocent. And they said, well, go ahead. So that's where we got the funding and the wonderful mentoring to me by Ted Husfeld.
Ted was an extraordinary lawyer. I believe that the law library at Landis Graham French now is named in his honor. So let's go ahead with the trial. What happened to the young man?
Okay, he never did get tried, but we got we had a hearing in Lake County on the question of whether or not he was competent to stand trial, which means that you can understand the charges. Mm-hmm. And you can assist your attorney in your defense. And he obviously was competent. He always was. But the hearing was just a disaster because we put on 3 psychiatrists, a PhD psychologist, criminologist, all kinds of experts that said he absolutely could stand trial. He understands the charge. He can help his attorney. And they put on one witness who'd never examined him, and the judge ruled for them because it was Lake County.
It was Lake County.
And then no judge goes against Willis McCall over there. And so we did 2 things. We before we even did that, we had filed the petition in the Florida Supreme Court to get the hearing, and we also challenged the constitutionality of the insanity law, and they ruled against us on the insanity law, but said we could have the hearing. But having ruled against us in the highest court of the state Supreme Court, that's where we started with the Habeas Corpus petition. Having lost that, we had a right to a direct appeal to the U.S. Supreme Court on the constitutional question, and we filed it, and they took it.
So it actually went to the United States Supreme Court, and then what happened?
Okay, the Supreme Court took the case, issued what they call an order to show cause directed to the Attorney General of Florida to show cause why, and gave them about 3 weeks, why we should summarily void the Florida statute and release him. And they filed a response. I responded to it, and then it sat there for a while. And that's when we had the hearing that the Judge Mills ruled against us. So we appealed that too at the District Court of Appeal. Eventually, that was the court that that reversed the judge from Lake County and ordered a trial. And then it came. We didn't get a chance to have a ruling in the Supreme Court of the United States because it was moot at that point. He was, but Florida knew what was going to happen to that statute, and so anyway, we got the right to a trial, and then Gordon Odom, the state attorney, had 15 days to appeal or put him on trial.
Gordon Odom is the state attorney
working out of the 5th Judicial Circuit, which includes Lake County.
Okay.
And so he had the 15 days. He took the whole 15 days and dropped the case. He null-prossed it. But even before he did that, we got Jesse out of Chattahoochee because he had been, all the judges who ever were involved in the case said he's harmless. He's not going to hurt anybody. He's not going to hurt himself.
So how long had Jesse been incarcerated in Chattahoochee by the time he was released?
14 years.
14 years in the state insane asylum.
Right.
Some of which time was in solitary confinement, wasn't it?
Well, it wasn't. I don't think he ever had solitary confinement, but he could not go outside at all. He couldn't.
I thought he was isolated.
He was isolated in a criminal ward, where they have no freedom at all.
I understand.
He
was just treated brutally.
Absolutely. He said it's in the book. So there wasn't a day I was there I wouldn't have liked to have died.
What a terrible book. Well, it's just a wonderful book, Beneath the Ruthless Sun. And now Jesse died just recently, didn't he?
Just recently, right after the book came out.
Right after the book came out. And it's worth noting that Gilbert King, the author, had written another book previous to this one, also dealing with Lake County. And that book won the Pulitzer Prize. And that had to do with Sheriff Willis McCall, but it also dealt with Justice of the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
Oh dear, what we've both.
Thurgood Marshall.
Thurgood Marshall,
yeah.
Yes, with the life of Thurgood Marshall. Right. Eminently worth reading. Both books are just page turners. Okay, so following this case, which you describe in the book as the most important case possibly of your career, and you're at Landis Graham French, what follows in your life?
Well, one thing that makes it a very important case to me is the fact that right after we got him out, and right after the Supreme Court had taken the case, they sent a signal to Florida, you better rewrite that statute. They called me to Tallahassee, a lady named Maxine Baker. She was in the House of Representatives. And she called me and asked me to come to Tallahassee and rewrite the law. It's called the Baker Act.
Are we talking about the law that allowed a death penalty for rape?
No.
That was another law.
That was U.S. Supreme Court later on.
Later on, the Supreme Court.
Yeah, the law, that was the law that let the state incarcerate someone who is charged with a crime without any evidence or proof that the person, if they don't want to try him, if they say he's insane, then you're locked up for the rest of your life.
For circumstantial.
Yeah, because without any finding that you're dangerous to yourself or others.
I see. Okay.
Yeah. And so the Baker Act has great protection against that. I did them
Well,
as
we're learning a great deal with your life, Richard. This is wonderful.
I did a whole lot of Baker Acts when I was a judge, and I can tell you this: we did them in Halifax Hospital, and we had live testimony from the psychiatrist in every case in the presence of the person they're trying to commit. It's a civil commitment. The person they're trying to commit would have an attorney, court appointed, if they didn't already have their own attorney. The state attorney would be there. A judge would always be there. And we had to hear them within 72 hours.
Well, that's very good information. Thank you for sharing that with us. So let's get on with your life now, because you've got a lot more life to live after this case. What did this lead to for you professionally?
Well, I was hired by the school board to be their attorney, and it's just one of my clients, but it was the biggest business in the county, and I was still pretty young. And that was interesting work because we had big bond issues, I think $120 million worth of new schools we built during that time, and we had a lot of different changes in laws, federal laws primarily, that provided us with rules of how we had to treat certain people, like the handicapped.
Of course.
And so I had to work during the period.
Special education.
Right, ESE, special education. And every school had a provision for it. And instead of just saying, you can't go to school because you got this handicap, you can't hear, or you're not mobile or whatever, they have to treat that handicap, accommodate it, right. And so that was a real problem trying to abide by that law, and figuring out how to do it. So that was interesting. And because I think of the Daniels case, also, just go back just a little bit, we did file a claim bill for him after we got him out. He was declared innocent and released. We filed a claim bill with the legislature. The Lake County people got it cut back quite a bit in amount, but he got, I think, $75,000.
But it had been more than double. That was what he should have gotten. All those years.
The special master who heard the case recommended at least $200,000 for him and $40,000 for me.
Oh.
But I didn't get a dime out of it. This guy in the legislature from Lake County got his mother's part of the bill killed. She got nothing. 14 years of losing her son. And Pearl. And cut Jesse's from $200,000 to $75,000.
They were just so mean-spirited.
Yeah.
Whatever happened to Willis McCall? Didn't he have a highway named after him?
He did, but it's been renamed now.
Justice prevailed.
It's State Road 45 or something now. It's no Willis McCall Boulevard anymore over there.
Well, let's talk a little bit more about you now. We've already covered that. So you came back to the land and you were working for you had cases with the board. What took you did you run for the judgeship?
No, I was appointed.
You were appointed.
But before I did that, I did run for a seat in the state legislature.
Oh, that's right. And you were a state representative for a while.
4 years.
4 years.
I did from 1988 to 1992.
How did you like that? Took you back to Tallahassee.
Yeah, I liked Tallahassee and I liked the legislature, but I didn't like starving. When I was there, we had special sessions. We had a budget crisis. We had all kinds of things, and we were just going up. Half.
What years were we there?
1988 to 2000. 88 to 92.
And who was governor?
Martinez was governor.
Martinez.
He was another Republican, and Childs.
And Childs was a Democrat.
Democrat. He beat Martinez. Martinez only served one term. Okay. Childs beat him. I had 2 years with Martinez and 2 years with Charles.
Very good.
So, but then
was there a dramatic difference between having a Republican governor and a Democratic governor?
I didn't notice it too much. I was a Republican, and I was, pretty close to Martinez because, but Charles, he treated me very fairly.
I think he was a fair man.
Yeah, and I had no problem with him. He invited me to these meetings that where he wanted to get some Republican support, and I got along with him fine.
So you were there until 1992?
Right.
And then what?
Well, then I made a run for the congressional seat, and I came in second to John Micah, which probably was a good thing. And then I'm out of politics.
You're a good sport about it, yeah.
So I just went back to practicing law, and that's when some of the judges asked me to put my name in the pot for an appointment to circuit judge. And I said, I'd like to do that someday. And then they said, well, you better check your age, your birth certificate, because if you don't do it now, it's going to be too late.
Did you enjoy working as a circuit judge?
I did, yes.
Are there any particular cases that you recall?
Well, I had some really big ones. I had to void a hospital merger in New Smyrna that $80 million merger involved the Burt Fish.
The Burt Fish Foundation. Weren't you on were you a trustee of the Burt Fish Foundation?
I am now, but
you are now.
I wasn't then.
Okay.
I would have had a conflict if I were. And I handled the biggest civil trial ever in the history of Volusia County. It was an airplane crash case. The verdict was $55 million, and it was appealed, but it was settled. So I don't know what the final numbers were, but
now wait a minute, I'm a little confused. This is when you were a judge?
Oh no,
this is when you were with Landis Graham French.
Right.
Oh, okay.
Right. Well, no. This is when I was a judge. I handled these as a judge.
Okay. Okay.
I had to rule on them, and of course the plane crash case was a jury trial. The jury made the decision, but I had to handle the trial. And when I say it's the biggest case, it's the biggest one where the companies could actually pay the judgment if they lost, and a lot of other good cases. And I started out in family division. I'd never done a family case in my life when Governor Bush appointed me, but that's where they put me, and I enjoyed it. I mean, I learned a lot, and then I went into, after 4 years, they put me in civil, where I stayed till I retired. So
well, you've had a wonderful career. Is there anything that, in particular, that other than the Jesse Daniels case, that you'd like to pass on to the next generation? Something that you've learned in this long, illustrious career that you think would be useful information for the younger people today?
Well, I would recommend that they take risk and take in my own case, it worked out every time I took a chance.
Take a risk.
Right. And if it doesn't, you'll learn from it, that way too. So.
Okay. Is there something in particular that you would like to be remembered for when you're gone? That when people look back and think of Richard Graham, what are they going to remember you most for?
Well, I don't think anybody else would much remember me for it, but I think proudest maybe of the way they have these judicial polls where the lawyers rate the judges and everything. And the one area that I always got 100% approval was judicial temperance and patience.
Judicial temperance and patience.
Right. And that was,
well,
I was
that's
very
not
proud.
bad.
When you rule against half the lawyers every day, and none of them say you don't have judicial temperance and patience, I was pretty proud of that. You know, some of them say he doesn't know what he's doing, but he does have patience.
Richard, this has been delightful talking to you, and I think we're finished.